All right, greetings everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Caroline Player, and on behalf of the Georgia Tech Alumni Association, I do welcome you all. We're in for a treat today as alumna entrepreneur Lara Hodgson guides us through overcoming barriers to action. Hopefully you will gain just the insight necessary to launch your own idea. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lara before we get started. Lara, President and CEO of Now Account, has launched product and service businesses, raised capital, and served in executive management roles with Nourish, a patented consumer product for children, Insomnia Consulting, an infrastructure development company, Dewberry Capital Corporation, a private equity firm in which she was a founding principal, Dunk, a performance footwear and apparel brand, and IXL, an internet development company. Lara has extensive experience in brand development, corporate strategy, business development, marketing, and operations. She has worked with companies such as Nike, Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Keds, and others. Lara received an MBA from the Harvard Business School and bachelor's in aerospace engineering with highest honors from Georgia Tech, where she was a scholarship member of the varsity track team, was named one of the top 20 students in the U.S. by USA Today, and was selected to study in Japan with U.S. Department of Defense. Lara also served as the ambassador to Lebanon for the 1996 Olympic Games. Lara serves as an appointee of the governor to the board of the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority and the Regional Transit Committee. She is an adjunct instructor in finance at Georgia Tech Scheller College of Business and serves as a founding board member of Atlanta Heights Charter School. She has also served on the boards of Flag Bank, Society of International Business Fellows, Central Atlanta Progress, and Georgia Tech's Alexander Tharp Fund. Lara is a member of the Leadership Atlanta Class of 2004 and Leadership Georgia Class of 2005. She was honored by the Georgia Tech Athletics Association with the Total Person Alumnus Award and by the Georgia Tech Women in Engineering as the Alumnus of the Year. Lara is a member of the Georgia Tech Young Alumni Hall of Fame and is internationally recognized speaker on innovation and creativity. So we are lucky to have her here today. Just by matter of housekeeping, our presentation will be about 45 minutes long, so you all know that we'll open up chat in the Q&A window at that time. So we'll definitely attempt to get your questions answered after the main presentation ends. So just open up your chat window and send us your questions to Lara or myself. And to avoid any background noise, if you'll just please make sure, if you aren't already on mute, to mute yourself. That'll help a whole lot. So without further delay, I'm going to turn this over to Lara for Grow Fearlessly.
Thank you, Caroline. It's great to be with a whole bunch of Yellow Jackets, especially coming up on our big weekend. So I appreciate everybody joining us. And, you know, I listened to that long bio, and it just confirms what I probably have known my whole life, which is that I have unmedicated ADD. Which is probably what's lent me to start all these different things. What I thought we'd do over the next 45 minutes or so is I'm going to kind of walk you through the top 10 things that I wish someone had told me when I was starting my first business. And as we go through that, I'm going to share stories about sort of how I've tackled those barriers or how I've looked at them differently. And a lot of what I'll share is also what I've done wrong, because believe me, I've done a lot of it wrong. So hopefully we just don't do the same wrong things twice. So if I think about sort of my top 10 things that I wish people had told me or had been honest about, the first one is be passionate. And I don't know how many of you have heard numerous times at conferences and everything else that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to be passionate about what you do. I actually disagree with that. In fact, I can remember sitting at Georgia Tech and sitting in business school and sitting at conferences and having people say to me, you know, you've got to be passionate about what you do. And it drove me nuts, because I would sit in the room and think to myself, I don't know what I'm passionate about. And I think it's particularly true for people like Georgia Tech students, engineering students. The reality is you're good at a lot of things. And what I came to realize is that throughout my life, and probably throughout a lot of yours, we're surrounded by people who love us dearly, and they want only the best for us. And so when we show that we're good at something, everyone decides to encourage us to do more of it. But what I think I came to realize throughout my life is that what you're good at may not be what you're passionate about. So, for example, as an aerospace engineering student, obviously I can do math, I can do spreadsheets in my sleep. I don't like spreadsheets. That's not what my personality is. And so, for the first time ever, when I look back, a comment that was made to me by one of my aerospace engineering professors at Tech finally makes sense. One of my professors told me, I think my freshman or sophomore year, that I had an engineering mind and a liberal arts personality. And when you're 19, a comment like that will concern you. I thought I might need medication for that. It sounded a bit like schizophrenia. But what I came to realize is that the way my brain worked and the way my personality interacted with other people were very different, and that could be a positive, not a negative. So, if you're sitting out there and people are telling you have to be passionate about what you do, don't let that keep you from starting something, because I don't believe you have to be passionate about what you do. I believe you have to be passionate about why you're doing it. And so what I have come to realize throughout my life is I have started a consulting company, I've started a footwear company, I now run a finance company, and remember I just said I don't like spreadsheets. And all of these things, I can be passionate about the what, but it's the so what that really matters. That's what I'm passionate about. Whether it's a shoe, whether it's a financial service product, as long as it's changing the world, that's what drives my passion. So I guess at the end of the day, when it comes to the comment about be passionate, number one, it doesn't have to be the what. You can be passionate about the why. So don't beat yourself up over the fact that you may or may not know exactly what you're passionate about. And number two, give yourself permission to be passionate about something that's not necessarily what everyone says you're the best at. Because like I said, you're probably good at a lot of things. And I know for me, I can be passionate about a lot of things. And so what I find with a lot of people is we put so much stress on ourselves to know that one thing that we're passionate about that it actually keeps you from doing anything. So that's my number 10. If we go to number 9, the other thing that I wish people had talked to me about was this idea of thinking big but acting small. I am a big thinker by nature. Everything that I am interested in has to do with changing the world, and my goal in life is nothing short of changing the world. But at the same time, while I'm thinking big and global and looking forward at what I want to do to change the world, you have to realize that if you keep thinking about that, you'll never actually get started. And, so many of us have these ideas and we brainstorm and we put them on flip charts, but nothing ever happens. And it's sort of like we don't know what that first step is. We don't know, how to get started. And the first step, to be honest, doesn't really matter as long as you take a step. So, picture yourself being in the center of the chessboard. As long as each step you take doesn't put you in a corner, then take it, because you'll learn something from that first step. And if it's wrong, so what? Because you can then correct and move back towards the center of the chessboard. But what you don't want to do is not act because you're overanalyzing, over-researching, overthinking, or in some cases sort of killing your own idea in your head. So what I always tell people is the greatest entrepreneurs have the ability to look forward and backward at the same time. I think that's also true of sort of paranoid people, but as you're looking forward, don't let that looking so far out in the future keep you from doing something. And, just to give an example of that, I remember when I was a student at Georgia Tech and I was in ERT, and the CEO of Delta spoke. And I remember somebody asking him, if he had one piece of advice, and his comment was, don't spend so much time looking so far into the future that you trip over what you're doing today. And so I think that's true of the job that you have if you're working for a company today. I think it's true of the idea you might be fostering in your mind that you want to start somewhere. Having the big picture is fantastic. You always have to have that. But if it keeps you from taking the first step, then it's become counterproductive. So the most important thing is to act and to start doing something. And I guess another example of that, when I was starting my water business, Nourish, I was sitting down with one of my good friends, Sarah Blakely, who many of you would know is the founder of Spanx. She's also the youngest self-made female billionaire ever. And Sarah made an interesting comment to me because we were talking about market research. And she said, you know what, I didn't do market research because so many people will tell you that you have to go out in the market and ask what people want. The reality is people don't know what they want in many cases. They don't know they have a need if your innovation is so new. And so, you know, she said, look, I cobbled together some money. I made a few prototypes. I went out to the retail channels I wanted to sell in. I started putting product out there, and I stood around and I talked to people while they tried it. So instead of doing market research and then launching her company, she launched it and learned as she went. So it was sort of live market research. And I have taken that piece of advice and used it in every company that I've been in, and it has served me well every single time. It is the hardest thing in the world for an engineer, of all people, to put something out there that you know isn't perfect, and then to be willing to learn from it, because most of us are sort of perfectionists at heart. But you absolutely have to do that because there's no market research on the planet that will tell you how to make your product perfect. And I can assure you of one thing. If you launch your idea, whether it's a product or service or any type of business, and you look back 5 years and what you're doing looks exactly like what you initially designed, you missed an opportunity. That means you weren't listening, because there's no way that you could design it so completely perfectly that you could anticipate all of the opportunities that would be out there and all the ways that your customers might use your product or service. So as you're launching, make sure that you're thinking long-term, but that you're acting small, because you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time anyway, right? That's my number 9. One of the things that I think is interesting to think about as we think about sort of big picture strategy and then short-term implementation is to really step back and define some of the words that we tend to throw around a lot, particularly at places like Georgia Tech. I hear people all the time say, I'm very creative, I'm very innovative, I'm very entrepreneurial. And they use those 3 words as if they're synonyms, which they're not. And so being an engineer, I have formulas for everything. I believe that creativity is the ability to look at the same thing as everyone else, but to see something different. And the reason that's my favorite definition of creativity is every single one of us has that. I remember when I was in high school, everyone really geared me towards math and science because that's what I was good at. I was not good at art and singing and painting and writing. And so in my mind, I wasn't creative. I was analytical. But I think that's what the professor meant when he told me I had an engineering mind and a liberal arts personality, is that my creativity is all about problem solving. And so for me, creativity is about looking at something that everyone else can see and look at, but seeing a different opportunity, seeing different potential. But if that's what creativity is, innovation is very different, because innovation requires implementation. It requires the creation of value. So you might be the most creative person on the planet, but if all of your ideas are in a sketchbook or on a flip chart and they're rolled up and stuck in your desk, you're not innovative because you haven't created anything yet. And so to get to innovation, you have to actually take action. You have to do something. And then if you want to go from innovation to entrepreneurship, there's a very important piece missing, and it's called risk. Because I know a lot of innovative people. I know inventors. I know people with patents. And all of those things are fantastic, but that's not entrepreneurship. Because entrepreneurship involves putting yourself and people around you at risk. And so if that's something that is something you can get comfortable with, then you'd probably be a great entrepreneur. You can be an amazing entrepreneur and not be creative or innovative. You can be the type of person who marshals resources and takes risk and gets things done, and that's what a lot of investors are. I mean, a lot of investors like to take risk, but they're not necessarily the people coming up with the ideas, and they're not necessarily the people that know how to do anything with it. And so you really need all 3 of those things to build and grow a successful business. You need creativity, you need innovation, you need entrepreneurship, you need curiosity, and they don't have to all come in the same person. So my number 8 is something that I hear all the time, which is, I'm not very entrepreneurial because I don't love risk. And it occurred to me one day that everyone thinks entrepreneurs love risk. I'm here to tell you that entrepreneurs do not love risk. We don't wake up every day thinking, I think I'll leap off of a cliff and just see what happens. Smart entrepreneurs are actually very good at managing risk. We're very focused on risk. We're not scared by the risk, but we don't love it, and we don't necessarily go seek it out haphazardly. And so, if you have told yourself or people have told you your whole life that you're more conservative, that you're not a risk taker, and that's the reason why you're not starting your own business, it's the wrong reason, because that's not a prerequisite for starting your own business. In fact, I would argue that the better entrepreneurs are those that are absolutely very sensitive to risk, and they know how to see it, how to look for it, how to mitigate it, and how to step around it and over it without jumping into the minefield. And so, give yourself a break. You don't have to love risk to be an entrepreneur. The other thing I would tell you, and this kind of goes back to my original point, number 10, is a lot of times when I work, particularly with students at Tech on the Inventure Prize and things like that, I think a lot of us honestly believe that our greatest idea has to have something to do with our area of expertise. And I'm here to tell you that it does not. In fact, some of your best ideas may have absolutely nothing to do with what your major was, with the type of industry that you work in today, or anything to do with the functional job that you have. And you know what? That's okay. It's awesome. Because most of your ideas come from experiences you have in life that you see something you can do better. And you don't have to have all the skill sets. You can hire those. So I meet so many people that I think would make fantastic entrepreneurs that would be great at starting and growing a business, and they never quite get started because they don't even realize they have these great ideas because they're waiting for the one that seems like the perfect bullseye that matches their background. And the reality is, if I go back and look at the products that I've patented, the companies I've started, none of them have a direct correlation to my major. None of them have necessarily a direct correlation to what I'd been doing before. They just came from an experience I had or a need I had that no one else was able to solve. So, one of my biggest messages today is sort of give yourself a break. Take the pressure off yourself and give yourself permission to not know everything, to have an idea that's not something you've always done before, and to be passionate about something that is not what everyone's always told you you're good at. So this is going to be a stress relieving webinar. All right, number 7. I often hear people tell me that failure's okay. And one of the things you'll find with me is I probably disagree with everything. I don't agree with the statement failure's okay, because I think when you say failure's okay, you are saying that it is acceptable, that it's excusable, and I think that failure is awesome. I don't think it's just okay. In fact, what I tell everyone is if there's one thing that you learn before and while you start your business is that you should fail, and you should fail fast, and you should fail forward, meaning the sooner you can fail, the better, because it's a lot less costly to fail earlier in your process than later. And as long as you learn and move forward with that failure, it's a gift. So, a great example, you see here on the slide, a picture of the water product that I had patented. And we spent months, typical engineer, trying to make this product absolutely perfect. We got all of our suppliers in a room. We spent a whole day going through every detail of the design, every detail of the manufacturability, every detail of the usability. And as we went through all of the details of all the different part components and how it was going to get filled and how it's going to get packaged and how it's going to be sealed, we found a lot of things that were wrong, and it was great. It was great. We got ready to launch. We had our first big order, and we got ready to launch, and we had these perfect labels, which if you look at the picture, you can't even see the label, which was why it was so perfect. is that it fit perfectly on the bottle, and we had hand applied them. We had, worked on the material, the coloring, everything. And right when we got ready to start our first order and we ran it on the automated equipment, the material was forming air bubbles because the material had a strong memory to it, and it was wanting to go back to its original position, but our bottles were convex in two directions, right? So horizontally and vertically. And so the material didn't like that. And everyone was freaking out. It didn't look right. And so we sat down literally for a week, me and my entire team at the table, and we started hand applying labels to thousands of bottles. Because in the meantime, we were testing new materials on the automated machine, but we still had to hit our ship date. And while we were doing that, we realized that part of the reason the labels were doing that is that they were too big. They were literally the shape of the bottle. And that if you look at the print, it's only on a very small of that. And so to make it easier to hand apply, we started taking scissors and cutting them down to smaller sizes. And in the meantime, realized, why in the world are we making these large, expensive labels when we can make them much smaller? And so what I tell people is, if that failure hadn't happened, if the machines had worked fine, we never would have realized that our labels were too big. And we never would have been able to cut the cost out of those labels and take them down to a much smaller size. So the failure was a gift. And the biggest key is that when something goes wrong, because it will, that you focus less on why it went wrong and who was to blame, and more on how are you going to fix it. Because the fact that it went wrong is a done deal, right? That's in the past, and it's more about what are we going to do to fix it. So seek out failure. And I think my favorite story when it comes to failure, this on the same slide is a picture of me with Sarah Blakely, who I mentioned earlier was the founder of Spanx. And Sarah's dad and I were having lunch one day, and he was telling me a story about how when Sarah and her brother were younger, every Friday at the dinner table, he would ask them, what did you fail at this week? And if they didn't have an answer, they got punished. Seriously, they got punished. I remember thinking to myself, that is so weird. Why would you punish your kids because they didn't fail at something that week? And when I asked him that, he said, because if you went an entire week and you didn't fail at anything, you couldn't possibly have tried something new. Shame on you. You lost an opportunity. You lived so safely in the middle of your bubble that you just gave up the opportunity of a lifetime each and every week. And so that story has always stuck with me, because Sarah would tell you that it's the fact that she was raised in a household where failure wasn't okay. Failure was celebrated. And that's what gave her the guts, with no business background, to launch a product that everyone told her was stupid, that nobody would need, nobody would want. And, the rest is history. She's an amazingly successful business person. And so I would argue that don't just let yourself say failure's okay. Celebrate it. Look for it. Try it. The most amazing thing about failing early and failing forward is you realize that the world doesn't end once you fail. And, for many of us, I still remember the first time I didn't get an A in a class, and it was a graduate class at Tech, and I thought the world was going to end. And then I woke up the next day and realized that the world was exactly the way it was before, and I was just fine. It is a very liberating feeling to look for failure and realize that you can overcome it and be better for it. All right, number 6. I firmly believe that people are more important than ideas. If you have a great idea and average people, you probably will not be successful. If you have great people and an average idea, the sky's the limit. The world is full of products that were just okay ideas, or services or businesses that were just okay ideas, but great people made something great out of it. And so when I'm looking at our company in terms of who we're going to hire and adding people to the team, what I always do is I hire mindsets, not skill sets, because I can train you to do almost anything that I want you to do, but I can't train you how to think. And so it is more important to surround yourself with people who have similar mindsets than making sure you have people that have particular skill sets or a specific idea. In fact, I got this horribly wrong when I first started Nourish. We had put together a team of 4 people to start the company that on paper had the perfect resumes. I mean, one person had a legal background, and one person had a financial background, and one person was a product development person, and one person was marketing. I mean, we had all the pieces, but our mindsets weren't the same, and it was absolutely awful. And so, you know, as you think about starting your company, people often ask me, you know, who is the ideal partner? The ideal partner is not your best friend, unless, of course, you don't want to keep the friendship because you're too close to each other. But the ideal partner is also not somebody you don't know. And in my businesses, I have always partnered with people that I knew enough to know that their character was unquestionable, that I wouldn't for a second question whether I could depend on them in terms of work ethic and mindset and the way that they thought, but I didn't know so well that we were around each other every day. And so it has worked out fantastic. In fact, for all the things I've done wrong in my businesses, I've done things wrong with the product, wrong with the service, wrong with the strategy, wrong with the finance, but the one thing that is the most important to get right is the people that are around you, because undoing that is excruciatingly painful. And I still, to this day, I mean, when we make a hiring mistake, it is the hardest thing that I do is to undo it, and to try and do that in a way that I maintain my sanity and don't get sick. So make sure that you put more emphasis on the people than necessarily on the idea. Number 5, which is one of my favorites, is that the what is more important than the so what. And I've talked about this before, that what it is doesn't really matter if the so what matters. And so it matters in terms of what you choose to do and what you're passionate about is the so what, but it also matters in what you put your ego into. I meet people all the time who design a product or service, start a business, and they love their product. I mean, they love it. It is perfect. And they will brag to you about how amazing the functionality is and the widget does this, and it's so cool. And my biggest concern is always, if what you're in love with is the what, then you're missing the boat. Because if you love what you've designed so much, you're never going to be open to hearing what's wrong with it. Your passion and your ego should be in the problem that you're solving. If your ego is in the problem that you're solving, if what you really care about is the so what, then the what can change, and it should change over time. But if you're in love with the what and you think it's perfect, then you will most likely miss the biggest opportunity. I will tell you that when I first started Nourish, the water company, in my mind, it solved my problem. And that problem was that I had a new child, he was spilling in the back of the car, it was hard to travel and mix bottles together. What I hadn't even thought about was things like disaster relief and sporting events and things like that. My customers came up with those ideas. But if I had been so tied to what I started the business for, I would have missed the opportunities that actually made the business what it was. So again, make sure that your ego is in the so what, not in the what, or else you won't have the flexibility to change and grow. So my number 4 is what you know versus what you notice. And this is probably one of the most disheartening things for a student from Georgia Tech to hear. But here goes. All innovation, all great ideas, all creativity does not come from what you know, it comes from what you notice. And that really sucks for people that have spent a lot of time and a lot of dollars to know a lot of things, right? We're all really smart, we know a lot of stuff. But the reality is your innovation, your creativity, your new ideas rarely come from what you know. They almost always come from what you notice. And so you have to be open to noticing things. Curiosity to me is maybe more important than creativity, because you have to have the willingness to be curious about why things are the way they are and why they couldn't be better. So if there's one thing you remember from this whole presentation, it's focus on what you notice. What you know will help you design something better, but it won't help you come up with the idea. What you notice will give you the idea, the identification of the problem, and then you can apply what you know. So let me show you an example, and we've already talked about my favorite definition of creativity. As you can tell, I kind of make up my stories as I go. Well, here's what's interesting. If you think about that definition of creativity, the ability to look at the same thing as everyone else and see something different, we all reach our peak of creativity at age 5. By age 8, we're down to 32%. By age 44, we're down to 2%. It is scary, but it also explains why there's very little innovation coming out of companies these days, because we have a lot of 44-year-old CEOs running around, not a lot of 5-year-old CEOs. But if you think about what happens at 5 years old that drops off so drastically, we all start school. We all start school at 5 years old. And at 5 years old, when you start school, all of a sudden, your questions get answered very differently. There's one right answer. It's in the back of the book, and your goal is to find it. Think about the questions that you ask when you're 5. If any of you have a 5-year-old running around your house, then your house sounds like a chorus of the word why. Why? It's like you have birds in your house. The child will ask why until you answer because I said so, which is when you kill it. But why is the key to all innovation, right? Think about what the average 44-year-old asks. By the way, the average 44-year-old asks about a quarter of the number of questions in their day that an average 5-year-old asks. But when a 44-year-old is asking a question, it typically starts with who, what, when, how much. We don't ask why anymore. Who, what, where, and how much, those are facts. That's just what you know. Why is what you notice. And the challenge is, as we get older, we're afraid to ask why because we're afraid to let people around us know that we might not know something. But when you stop asking why, you've cut off the fuel to all of your ideas. So we have to go back to being 5 years old and asking why again. And I honestly think it's getting worse. This is one of my biggest pet peeves. When I was growing up, this is what Legos looked like. They came in a bin with all these different colors of rectangles. And what you did with them was completely up to you. But if anyone has ever shopped for Legos recently, as I have with a 9-year-old son, you will find that they don't come in a bin anymore. Legos come in a kit. And it comes with the 1,292 pieces that you need to build that castle. And even worse, it comes with an instructions manual, which I'm sure is not for the 5-year-old, that's for the mom. The reason I think this is so awful is we all can follow instructions, but we are losing the ability to envision things. Lego, last time I checked, is not the world's expert on what a castle is supposed to look like. And so when a child sits down and starts playing with this and sees something different, they think it's wrong. And it is all I can do to fight the children in my life to say, we're going to throw the box out, we're going to throw the instructions out, and we're going to make up what a castle looks like. Because we have just as good a skill at envisioning a castle as Lego does. So make sure as you're going through, whether it's working with your children, whether it's working on your own ideas, don't fall into the trap of being prescribed on how to do something. Because the reality is, the person that's prescribing it probably doesn't know as much as you do, or they don't notice as much as you, that's for sure. So my number 3, and this also is much to the chagrin of my employees, is that your greatest ideas happen when you lack resources. Think about that. If you have, when I ask someone to do something and they respond, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough budget, I don't have enough resources, my answer is always, that's awesome. Go come up with some ideas and then we'll talk about the budget, the time, the resources, etc. Because if you have an unlimited budget, unlimited time, unlimited resources, you don't have to be creative. That's easy. So if you are trying to start a business in a down economy, that's awesome. You lack resources. You will come up with a much better idea than if you did it at the top of the market when money was flowing and everything was easy. So I remember telling my students at Tech when they were coming out sort of in the, the bottom of the economy and they were all so frustrated. I was like, you don't realize today what a gift you have. Because when I graduated from Tech, it was the top of the market. And I think it's been a huge disservice to most of my counterparts that we started in a time when Everyone got all the money they wanted, everybody got a VP title in 2 years, and everybody pretty much maxed out what they were doing because they never had the benefit of lacking resources, having to be creative, having to be scrappy, et cetera. So if you don't have resources, if you don't have venture capital, if you don't have private equity, you are very lucky. Use that to your advantage. That's the greatest opportunity you'll ever have. So here's a couple of exercises that I do every day to sort of force my brain to think different and to not have resources. One of the skills that I use every day is called fluidity. And so I will start every morning and I'll take an object, and it can be something in my home, it can be something on my desk, and I give myself 2 minutes to come up with as many ideas for that object as I can come up with. And it's just a short, I do it to myself, I write them down. It's just a fun way to kind of get your brain going and exercise your brain in a way that's not sort of purely prescribed and analytical. So for example, one of my favorite things when I do a workshop with other people is to use a box of baking soda. The reason it's so awesome is that if you ask a group of adults to brainstorm what you can do with what you see on the screen there, they will brainstorm all these things like brushing their teeth and cleaning their clothes and deodorizing their kitchen and all these other things. And then I always respond, where did you get those ideas from? Because they're on the back of the box. And so the challenge most of us have is that because we know what baking soda is supposed to do, we fail to notice things. Now, if I ask a bunch of children, 5-year-olds, what you would do with that thing on the screen, they don't have a clue what baking soda is. They can't even read yet. And so what they will tell me is you could build a castle out of it. You could pour it in your front yard and go skiing. You can make fake snow. You can mix it with vinegar and gargle with it and go as a rabid dog on Halloween. You can make volcanoes. All of those ideas come from what they notice. They notice that it's an orange box with white powder in it. They don't know what it is, and that's a gift. So you have to kind of force yourself to stop knowing what something's supposed to do, because what you know is usually the greatest barrier to getting your idea to action. The second thing that I often do is you have to force yourself. You have to, number one, realize what the dominant side of your brain is, and then you have to force yourself to work on the other side. So I'm going to give you this little exercise, and I know we can't do it in a room together, which is usually when it becomes very obvious. But I just want you to kind of do it out loud to yourself, and you have to do it out loud. You can't say it in your head. If you look at this screen, you see 2 words, yellow and blue. On the next screen, I want you to out loud read the words to yourself, and then I'm going to have you do something else. So ready, go. Yellow, green, blue, orange, red, purple, blue, green, pink, orange, red, purple, purple, black, pink, right? We all do it in about the same amount of time, and you probably had almost the same little cadence that I did. But now what I want you to do is I want you to read yourself the colors out loud and see if you can do it in the same amount of time. Ready, go. So I wanted to give you a chance to do it by yourself, and now I'll do it. So if you go through red, blue, orange, yellow, white, green, white, yellow, red, red, white, orange, purple, green, blue. If you'll notice, you can't do it as fast as you did the words. And the reason is your left brain, the analytical side, reads words. Your right brain reads color. That's the more spatial / creative side. And the challenge for most engineers is that our analytical side gets developed much more strongly than the other side does. And so part of the challenge is you will come up with your best ideas and you'll come up with your best action when both sides of your brain are firing equally. And so what that means for most of us is we have to develop the less strong side more, and we don't develop it naturally in our day. So you have to do activities like the baking soda activity, et cetera, to get that other side of your brain firing. The other thing you have to do, this is my sort of top 10 for all the years that I've done talks on innovation and creativity. What I hear from people is that they get their best ideas when they're in the shower, exercising, driving to work, listening to music, listening to a church sermon, sitting on the toilet, daydreaming or falling asleep, mowing the lawn, reading a book, playing with kids. The only top 10 that I ever hear in terms of where do you get your best ideas is in a boring meeting. It's the only one that happens at work. But think about what's common about all of these activities. And it's something that happens during the boring meeting. You know when you get bored because you start doodling. And once you start doodling, that's the sign that your analytical brain has checked out. It's bored. It doesn't have anything to do. And so the dominant side of your brain checks out, which lets the other side of your brain participate. That's when you get your best ideas. So if you think about all these activities, what's common about them is that your left analytical brain is not thinking, because most of us don't go for a jog and while we're running think left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. Your analytical brain doesn't have to think about the activity itself, and so that frees the other side of your brain to participate. And so part of what you have to do for yourself is find out how to get your dominant side to check out for a while. And when it does that, you'll find that the other side of your brain starts to participate more, and you can come up with better ideas or come up with better ideas for how to implement your great idea. My number 2 is be a contrarian. And if you can't tell by now, usually when someone tells me something, my initial reaction is to not say that it's wrong, because that's negative, that's not a contrarian, but to question it. Why does it have to be that way? So when someone says, this is the way we've always done it, I don't say, no, that's wrong. What I do say is, why? Why do we do it that way? What if it were different? What if it were the opposite? And so part of that is making sure that you do question the way things have always been done. And I'm actually gonna skip over this video because I'm not sure if you'll hear the audio, and I want to be conscious of the fact that we have about 5 minutes. So when I think about this concept of being a contrarian, most innovation comes through opposites. So if you're trying to brainstorm a solution to a problem, the better brainstorm is not what would I do, it's the opposite. It's what would I never do? What would I get fired if I did? I always tell people that if I throw out an idea and you tell me it won't work, that's for darn sure what I'm going to spend the rest of the day on. Number one, because I want to prove to you that it can. But when someone tells you that won't work, the question isn't, okay, it's how do I make it work? What could I change to make that work? Now, you may have to change something pretty big like the customer, but it can work if you make something changed. The other thing you can do that's a great analytical exercise is to take your company, take your business idea, take your product, your service, break it down into all of its components or its assets, and then ask yourself, what would happen if that one went away? What would change? Who would buy it? What would it do? And then ask yourself the opposite question. What would happen if that's the only attribute you had? What could you do with it? So, for example, if I took, let's say I was designing a cola, and I took, I don't know, take the water out of it. What do I have? Well, now I have syrup. What would I do with that? Well, I can make candy out of it, right? So you can take each one of those apart. The last one is sort of where would you never look? And I will tell you, having been a consultant, that the two terms that I hate more than anything in business is the concept of benchmarking and best practices. Because both of those can help you keep up with the competition, but neither of them can help you get ahead. And so what I always tell people is when you're trying to look at your business, don't compare it to other things that are like it. Compare it to things in totally unrelated industries. So for example, I was working with Hands-On Atlanta one time. And if you're, obviously when you were at Tech, you were in Atlanta, but if you know Hands-On Atlanta, they will take people that need projects done, like playgrounds that need to be painted, and they'll take people with time and resources and they'll match them up. And they were comparing themselves to all these other nonprofits. And I was like, wait a minute, nonprofit is just a structure. What do you really do? I mean, at the end of the day, they match needs and resources. Who else does that? Recruiting services do that. Online dating services do that. Headhunters do that. So if you're looking for a way to really innovate, find the best online dating service and figure out why they're the best, and then take that and apply it back to the world of nonprofits, right? That's real innovation. And so, those are sort of the ways that I think about it. And then the number one thing that I wish I had known, and I'll tell you, this is sort of what led to what I'm doing today, is I thought the hardest part of starting a business was going to be coming up with the idea, getting the patent, raising money, getting prototypes made, launching the product. That's the easy part. The hardest part of building a successful business is the success that you strive so hard for is what actually will kill you. And so when I was starting my water business, I thought it was going to take a whole bunch of money to do it. I had private equity groups that wanted to invest, and I just couldn't get comfortable with the idea that I was going to give up half my company to somebody else. And so instead, I cobbled together a little bit of money. I handmade a prototype. Duct tape can do a lot. These days, we have 3D printers, so you can make it for a couple $100. And I went out and I found someone that was going to buy the product, a retailer that would buy the product. And that's when I made the first product. I literally figured out what the minimum runs would be for every component of my product. I ran the minimum run. I did exactly what Sarah Blakely said. To me, the first order was market research. It wasn't even, that's when I was going to learn. And so I started selling into these small retailers, and the business was growing great. People were ordering slightly larger amounts, this many cases, then twice that number of cases, et cetera. When I would sell to them, they would write me a check or give me a credit card, and everything was great. And then a year into it, I got my first big order from Whole Foods, which should have been a very happy day for an entrepreneur when you now have your product in national distribution. We just bagged the big deal today. It was awesome. And that almost killed me because now my orders were truckloads, and they wanted me to send them an invoice. And an invoice says net 30, which means you can pay me 30 days later, which I didn't like, but all entrepreneurs take the order and figure it out later. The problem is they didn't pay me 30 days later. They didn't pay me 60 days later. What they did do was place a second order at about day 45. And I said, look, you haven't paid me for the first one. How am I supposed to make the second one? My vendors aren't going to make it without me paying them, and my employees really kind of want to be paid. And I realized that I was growing to death. And it was an awful, awful feeling. But you know what it was? It's what started my current business, because I realized that everyone else had the same problem I had, and that all these small businesses were trying to grow and sell to other businesses and governments, and they couldn't get paid. And so all I did is I said, okay, let's look at the fact that money's not equal, right? I can go raise equity, but I'm going to give up half my company. That's the most expensive capital ever. I can go try and get debt, which banks aren't lending, but if I could, it still has a huge cost to it, right? Because if something happens and I don't make my payment on time to the bank, I end up losing my company. Or I can make money from the company itself, which is the lowest cost, lowest risk money that there is. But the problem was there was no way to get it because all my customers are holding my money. I realized that I was a bank because I was sending you product and you were taking 90 days to pay me. And so essentially what we did is we said, okay, when you walk into Starbucks, you pay them with a credit card, right? They get paid that day. When and if you pay your Amex bill is not their problem. But that doesn't work for businesses that sell to other businesses and governments. Nobody will pay with a credit card. They want to have accounts payable. So we created the first ever merchant service that if you're a small business selling to other businesses and governments, you can get paid immediately. It feels like you took a credit card and your customer never knows. Now, here's the funny part. I now run a finance company. And if you remember at the very beginning of the call, the one thing I said I didn't like. I don't like finance. I don't like spreadsheets. But what I did is I found a problem. And I never would have found that problem if I hadn't started my water business. And so, again, as you're doing things, give yourself permission. I have a degree in aerospace engineering. There is nothing about my background that would suggest I should be running a finance company, except that I had a need and I found people that could partner with me to solve it. And so my business partner with Now Account is also a Georgia Tech alum. He founded Peachtree Accounting Software years ago, and together we've been able to build what to me is the most exciting company that I've ever been a part of, and it has nothing to do with my background. And he's an industrial engineer, by the way, so neither one of us are finance people. At the end of the day, this is my final slide, I have an equation, like all good engineers do, for how you take your ideas into action. Number one, as we all know, if a fraction is going to get larger, then the numerator has to get bigger and or the denominator has to get smaller. So you have to start out with more ideas. So back to the baking soda thing, train yourself to just come up with lots of ideas. If you want a good one, you got to start with a lot of them. And a lot of them are going to be bad, but it's the bad ones that lead you to the good. So don't limit yourself to the number of ideas you come up with. You multiply by that by the number that you implement. So remember, action, you have to actually do something. Great ideas don't happen because they're on a spreadsheet, and they don't happen because they're on a flip chart or a whiteboard. You have to actually do something. Take the first step. And you have to add your failures. That's not a minus. Fast failures are good, so it adds the numerator. And of course, you and your team have to have similar mindsets in order to be going in the same direction. But maybe the most important part is that the denominator has to get smaller, which means your penalty to yourself and to those around you for failing has to be less than the penalty for doing nothing. For most of us, the reason we never get started is that we don't have to do anything. You have to force yourself to do something, and the only way to do that is to make the penalty for doing nothing greater than the penalty for failing. And so finally, what I would leave you with is the idea that you can't depend on your eyes if your imagination is out of focus. And with that, if I can figure out this, I think we're going to take some questions.
Yes, we will. Folks, feel free to go ahead and type your questions into that chat box, and we will answer those.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Laura. I really enjoyed it.
Sure. Sure. And I see, someone had typed in, or someone had asked about a lean startup model. One of the things that I have learned is it never takes as much money to get started as you think. Now, it may take more money to grow than you think. So most of us overestimate what it takes to get started, but underestimate what it takes to grow. And so when I first was starting Nourish, I had gotten all these, prototype quotes, and it was going to take a couple $100,000 to get the molds made. And then somebody said, why don't you just mock it up, right? I mean, your only goal in getting those made is to show somebody the product so that they'll commit to buying it. And so I absolutely agree that you should bootstrap when you get started. Don't give your company away when you're just getting started. Wait until you've got something of real value and cobble it together. And it's okay for it to not be perfect. In fact, that's part of the charm of being an entrepreneur, is that it's not perfect. And you'll be amazed at how people will forgive that. But instead, save it for when you're ready to scale, and that's when you're going to need more resources than you probably estimate. But at that point, you can get it a lot cheaper.
Laura, I have one regarding having a mentor. This person saying that a key benefit of building a startup is having a mentor. Do you have any recommendations on where to look for a mentor or how to find one?
Yep. For me, I don't really have a mentor, but what I do have is a personal board of advisors, and I think they're very different. I think most of us walk around looking for mentors and thinking that it's someone we're going to just sort of like find a soulmate in, right? We're going to kind of gel, and they're going to really be supportive and, pat us on the back and pick us up when we fall. But what I have found to be more valuable is to have a personal board of directors. And the reason that's more valuable is they kind of do the opposite. They tell me when I'm being an idiot. They tell me when I'm heading in the wrong direction, when I'm believing my own BS too much. And that is more valuable than someone who's going to make you feel good and tell you what you do well. Most of us have some of that around us. Mentors don't have to be the stereotypical, person that's 20 years older than you that's done exactly what you've done. Mentors, in many ways, can be your peers. They can be people that have had experiences that are different than yours. But what's more important to me is a board of advisors or a board of directors that you view yourself as being somewhat accountable to, and the accountability can be reputational, that will tell you when you're really wrong.
Got it. Great, thanks. Let's see, I've got a couple coming in on my screen. Let's see.
Yeah. I have one that just came
Go
in.
ahead.
What are your thoughts on protecting your idea so someone doesn't take it? Again, I'm a pretty big contrarian on this, and I know there's a few examples out there of, you know, Facebook, et cetera, where somebody stole an idea. When I started out, I had a lot of ideas, and I never shared them with anyone because I was afraid somebody was going to steal them. And somebody told me one time, Laura, if you don't share your idea, how's anybody supposed to help you with it? And that was the best advice I've ever gotten. I have news for you. Most of the world is very busy. We don't have time to walk around trying to steal other people's ideas. I mean, I have enough ideas that I'm working on my own that the last thing I'm going to do is go take somebody else's. And I have yet to find someone who has taken a single idea and tried to do it. Most 99.9% of the people I run into have tried to help me. And if I hadn't shared my idea, I wouldn't be where I am.
On my end, I have the question from a participant. How do we influence other companies to partner with us?
Yeah.
When you offer partnerships, they ask if you already have customers at hand, but the truth is we haven't entered the market yet.
Right. So I think, you know, what most people kind of do wrong when they're looking for partners is they're focused more on what they get out of the partnership instead of on what they give to the partnership. So it's funny you asked that. I literally was on a 6 a.m. flight this morning flying back from a meeting in New Orleans with a potential partner. And the funny thing is, when we first sat down, you know, their joke was, you know, we go through all these meetings, people are always trying to sell us stuff. And I said, you know what, I'm not here to sell you anything. In fact, I'm here to tell you what I'm going to give you. And they were sort of shocked by that. But I got 3 hours of their time. And it was funny. They're like, why do we even have 3 hours in the calendar? And I said, I will guarantee you that you're going to be fully engaged for 3 hours. And they sort of laughed because how many of us can ever be fully engaged for 3 hours? But it was because what my focus was on how I was going to help them, and then and less on what I was going to get out of them. And so, you know, partnerships are exactly that. It's a two-way street. If it's just that you want something out of them, then you're probably not going to get anywhere. If you go in with sort of what you can offer them, then they may just be willing to help.
Great, thank you.
Let's see. So I've got a couple of them. One is, how do you separate the true penalties of failure from the fears of failure that tend to lock us up? So I think most of us in our minds make the true penalty out to be much greater than it is. In fact, I told someone the other day, one of the biggest mistakes we make is we make our decisions out to be monolithic. And when I think back to like when I was in college, some of the decisions that I literally was like physically sick over, I can't even remember them. I mean, they weren't that monolithic. They didn't change my life at all, right? I mean, and so part of it is if you take those failures sooner rather than later, then each little failure you take has a smaller penalty, a smaller true penalty, because you've broken it down. 10 small failures will probably hurt less than holding off and having one massive failure. So part of it is kind of breaking the failures into little chunks where the real penalty isn't as great as you make it out to be in your mind.
Right. Laura, one more thing I've got on my end. Do you ever feel that a piece of your business puzzle is really ready to go, quote unquote, ready to go?
No, you're never there.
Yeah.
You're never there. I mean, there's always something that you have to be working on. It's every time you get something to the goal line and you think, yes, I'm finally there, something else is wrong, right? So it's just like you're never done living, your product is never there. And if you're waiting for this aha moment, I mean, it's sort of like when I was starting out in business thinking that I was going to have this aha moment when it was like, okay, when's the best time to like become a mom and have kids? There's never a best time. There's never a then. There's never a there. You're never at the end. So again, like free yourself of the worry that, you know, some halo is going to come out and say, you know, now is the, you know, sort of anointed time. It's not going to happen.
Got it. And if we have one more minute, let me see idea of what you did fail at this week, the concept you discussed about Sarah Blakely's family. So it's so great for encouraging young kids. Do you have any other suggestions for overcoming that giant drop in creativity from age 5 to age 8?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, some of like, you know, I shared the baking soda one, but I mean, we could do another session. I have hours worth of those types of activities that I do with myself and with my friends and with my kids and with my employees every day that just sort of help you to get out of that box of being so analytical. There's also some good books out there as well, and I can, you know, go through and think up some of those, Caroline, and share them with you if you want to post them somewhere. That just have little things like, you know, one thing you can do, this is kind of fun, take your watch if you wear one. I was actually told by one of my students at Tech last year that if I wear a watch, you must be over 35 years old. So apparently, if you're younger than that, you may not be wearing one. But if you do wear a watch, take it off right now and put it on the other hand. And it will feel so weird. And then every time you ask yourself what time it is and you look at the blank arm, ask yourself what you can be creative about. It'll change the way you think.
Nice.
And it'll drive you nuts, by the way. And then someone else asked, so for a startup, if the customers pay after 30 days, how would the startup company pay its bills? That is the biggest challenge of any small business, is that for some reason we have, as a market, conditioned ourselves to believe that we should be able to wait 30 days to get paid. Now, most people, you know, historically would go down to the bank and get a line of credit and draw on that. That's actually why we started Now Account, is to solve that problem, so that you can have a Now Account and get paid immediately and not have to make your customer pay sooner than they're going to. So there are some things out there. Credit cards help if you're selling to consumers. They'll pay you with a credit card. But if you're selling to businesses, you really do have to, you know, either go get a line of credit or get something like a Now Account that helps you get paid immediately.
Well, this has been fantastic, and I, again, thank you, Laura, for leading this, and thank you all online for participating. I think we might have even come up with some ideas for a future program, I'm hoping. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us today, everyone. We're going to say goodbye for now, but if you I'll pass along any information, Laura, that you have on those book ideas. And folks, if you want to follow up with me on anything, just let me know. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.